Another Wednesday edition of Speed Chronicles here on the RevTV YouTube channel. I'm Todd Lewis. Thanks for tuning in again this week. We do it every Wednesday, look at some stories that are taking place in auto racing, motorsports in general, the business side, and other things. At Todd Lewis Sports, at RevTV, if you've got some thoughts, ideas, comments, questions, feedback, we look forward to it. We've been doing this right throughout the summer now. It'll continue for a period. We're going to continue to evolve it as well. So there may be some new things in the future. Never know. Always looking for new opportunities. A few things that we'll touch on this week. NASCAR Canada season. It has concluded for the 2024 year, wrapped up with the final event of the season at the Autodrome Montmagny, east of Quebec City. NASCAR had the big Bristol weekend. It was the elimination round in the Cup Series, in the Xfinity Series. Dale Jr. raced. Maybe it's the last one. Doesn't have anything confirmed for next year. There was lots of talk and speculation about that. Formula One, back in action once again. In Singapore, Lando Norris romps to a big victory, but there are some other stories that surround that as well, as of course there always are with Formula One. And we had IMSA back in action at the Brickyard with another endurance event, and it was all kinds of weather that they experienced over the weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on the road course with the IMSA sports cars. Let's start with NASCAR Canada, and let's send congratulations to Marc-Antoine Camirand and the 96 team. They had a hell of a year, just a really, really good year. Won a bunch of races, bunch of podium finishes, led from start to finish in the season, and picked up his second championship in 3 seasons. He and Robin McCluskey joined forces to start this team 3 years ago. They scored a championship in their first year. Very nearly had a championship last year as well. But Trayton Lapsevich had an outstanding season, one for the ages. And Mark, even though he had a really good year, was the runner-up. But this season, another outstanding year, and he finishes and wins his second championship. Kevin Lacroix, who also had an absolutely unbelievable season. He had 6 wins. In fact, he had 3 in a row to wrap up the season. Absolutely incredible. Finished on the podium 10 times. But he had a couple of DNFs, and that's what hurt him in the championship. You should think you win 6 out of 13 races. Boy, that's pretty outstanding. You should be in great position for the championship, and he was. But Marc-Antoine Camirand had that consistency through the year, and Kevin had a couple of races that he didn't finish. So Andrew Ranger also had another solid, really, really good season. Those 3 were the story this year. It was one of those 3 winning the races this year in the NASCAR Canada Series. So we'll see what everybody else does this off season. There's a little bit of work to do for teams to try to catch up and close that gap just a little bit on those first 3 finishers, whether it's Marc-Antoine Camirand, Kevin Lacroix, and Andrew Ranger. The first 3 in the standings, they were all really good. The season finale itself, first time NASCAR had been to the Autodrome Montmagny. Had everything you could really ask for a mid to late September race. We had a pretty good field of cars with 23 entered. The racing was good. We had good battles throughout. We had some local flavor with some of the local drivers who run at Montmagny, who were participating in the NASCAR series and showed very well. It was a 2-day weekend. They had ACT racing there on the Saturday night and NASCAR on Sunday. Busy weekend, packed grandstands, enthusiastic crowd. It was a really, really good event. The track owners and operators did a very nice job. Of course, nothing ran perfectly, as is always the case with a first-time event. They'll make a few adjustments, but they did a really good job. I personally don't believe it needs to be a 2-day event. We'll see what happens with the schedule next year. But now that the racing is over for 2024, it's going to be a busy off season for both the series and for the competitors. As I mentioned, those top 3, Camirand, Lacroix, and Ranger, they were a step ahead of everybody this year. And the rest of the racers are going to have to go to work and do some work to try to close that gap and tighten up the competition next year. I expect that they will. They're not miles and miles ahead, but they were good, and they were good everywhere that we went. So there's a little bit of work to do. We'll see what else comes this off season, this was a hard year on teams. This was a hard year for teams. This was, in my opinion, I don't think it was a great schedule this year. Now that we've gotten through it, you have a chance to kind of take a breath and look back. This was a tough schedule for the teams. This was not ideal. It's not the way that they would draw it up, and there will be changes next year. It won't be confirmed for some time yet, probably going to be at least a month, maybe even a little bit longer before the 25 schedule comes out for the NASCAR Canada Series. And that's fine. The work has long since begun with conversations and discussions about operators of this year and looking at some other possible venues that they can go to as well. So we'll see what comes of the schedule. There were 2 long trips this year. The trip to the east with stops in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, and out west where you're in Edmonton and Saskatoon. Those were both like 2-week trips. Those have got to be shortened up. It's too long for those teams. So we'll see what the series comes up with for next year. There was a bunch of talk about this being the first time that the NASCAR Canada season ended with an event in Quebec. Well, the world didn't come to an end. There was a bunch of whining that, well, what about Ontario and what about Ontario racers? Yeah, there were races in Ontario, but I don't think it's a problem ending the season in Quebec, especially at a track that was packed top to bottom, side to side, like the Autodrome Montmagny. Great crowds, great number of racers that were participating, and a very well run event. There's a lot of whining that's gone on about, well, what's with all the Quebec racers? We don't have as many Ontario racers. That's not a Quebec problem. That's an Ontario problem. The Quebec drivers and teams have found a way to make it work in terms of partnerships and sponsorships and good events. They're doing the job. Yeah, there's some work to do in Ontario. Is it an insurmountable hill? No. We'll figure it out. But each of the Quebec events had good crowds, had a good field of cars. I don't know what's to gripe about. Racing activity was good. Enthusiastic crowds too. People jumping up and cheering when their favorite driver makes a pass. I think it was awesome. If you'd like more Ontario races, I understand that. I'm not sure where else we can go in Ontario though. See, we've got Delaware. That's been on the schedule. That's fine. Toronto will hopefully be back on the schedule in 2025. The Ashweekon race has been fine. Sunset has been on and off the schedule. So is Toronto. So is Delaware for that matter. But where else are you going to go? Where else are you going to run this series? There's only a certain number of places, be it oval track or the street circuit in Toronto, that you can race in Ontario. So that's part of the issue as well. And they need good fields. They need good crowds. It's got to be the right combination of everything. So as I said, there is work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done by NASCAR. There's a lot of work to be done by the teams. But I feel good that things are moving in the right direction. I think there were some positive steps this year. I think there were some things learned this year. And I think it's probably going to be a little bit quiet for now while some work is done in the background. And that's okay. I'm looking forward to 2025 to see what comes out in terms of the schedule and to see the other parts of the business that are going to be looked at and addressed as well, because there will be other work done. NASCAR in Bristol, as mentioned, there was NASCAR, there was ARCA, there was trucks, there was Xfinity. It was all there. Positive reviews for the Xfinity race. For the Cup race, not as much. Kyle Larson controlled this one from the beginning. What did he lead? Like 499 of 500 laps or something like that. There was some talk about this race not being as exciting as some of the Bristol drama that we've seen in the past. They're not all going to be diamonds. They did not have the same tire drop off that they did in the earlier race this year. I think that was part of it. There's a bunch of questions going on right now in terms of what made up the Cup race at Bristol and why wasn't it the dramatic race that we expected. We'll see. A little disappointing that they didn't have the same kind of enthusiasm. As mentioned, it was a Formula One weekend as well in Singapore. Cool track, challenging track. Lando Norris, McLaren, dominating win once again, closes up the Drivers' Championship just a little bit more. Max still has a big lead, But this fight, I think, is going to continue to tighten up as we move through the rest of the Formula One season. And I think there's going to be a battle towards the end of the year for the drivers' title. There already is for the constructors, as McLaren has overtaken Red Bull. I think both are going to go down to the end of the year. The glamour one, if you will, is, of course, the drivers' championship. That constructors' championship, boy, that is huge for teams. That is so important. It's money, of course, but not just the money. It's the prestige of being the best team. And that's why it is super important. So I'm glad that we're going to have championship battles for both the constructors and the drivers' title in the Formula One series. The other little interesting nugget, well, one of them from Formula One in Singapore, is Daniel Ricciardo, who made a pit stop near the end of the race, threw on a set of soft tires, whipped out a fast lap, got the fast lap of the race, and snagged that point away from Lando Norris, if you will, and denied him closing up the driver championship a little bit further. There's lots of noise around Daniel Ricciardo, as there often is. Is he done? Is he going to get replaced? Well, you know what? It's long overdue. I don't know why they brought him back in the first place. He's a fan favorite. That's why they brought him back. It was personal popularity. It wasn't because of his achievement in the car, and it hasn't been his achievement in the car because Yuki Tsunoda has outpointed him since they've been teammates. It's over. It's time. But he's an attention getter, and he's popular among the fans, and that's why he came back. That's not why he's here. It's not because of his driving talent and ability, because that has waned over the years. Would they have been better to take a younger driver, put him in the car with low expectations, spend some time grooming and growing that driver into the role? Maybe. It was if we put Ricciardo in the car, we might get some immediate gratification versus the long-term investment of putting a younger driver in that has the skill but needs the seat time and the time in the car to grow those skills into a championship contender. We'll see what happens with it. Perhaps the stupidest story of the weekend, and yes, it is stupid, F1 president Ben Sulayem being upset with some four-letter words that were being used. Oh my gosh, four-letter words, bad words. Some of them start with F. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I debated whether or not to even talk about this, because maybe it's best just to ignore it and the silliness goes away eventually, but it hasn't seemed to for several days now. Now, not everyone accepts the use of four-letter words, and I get that. Curse words, swearing, whatever you want to call it. That's fine. I agree. It's often overused, sometimes by me, but they are just words. Yes, I know words have meaning and they're important and they're deep, but sometimes that's just the way you express your frustration. And in the Max Verstappen incident where he used an F word, and it started with the talk of team radios. You know what? You don't have to listen. They can always beep it out. But a little more to this. If you're the Formula One boss, I understand that you want to present your series in the best possible light. And I understand that you don't want drivers dropping F-bombs every other word. And that makes sense. But when it's on the radios and it's sport, and it's intensity and it's adrenaline, comments are going to get blurted out. Sometimes they're not going to be very pleasant. Sometimes they're going to have four-letter words or curse words or swear words or whatever you want to call it. Would it have been better for Max Verstappen to say the car was fouled up during a press conference than the phrase he used? Maybe. But is it really worth having a formal inquiry about? I think there's really bigger issues and more important things that they could be looking at and addressing. Max was great at making fun of it, giving 1- and 2-word answers when in the official press conferences and offering longer answers outside. You know, I think that was funny and he was poking fun at it. Let's hope it passes. The nonsense goes away. But hey, it's Formula One, so it may not. A quick bit of IndyCar news. The charters are official, but who cares? They're sending out press releases. They're proclaiming this as a huge step forward for the series, and it's a good thing for the business part of the series. But again, you've got much bigger issues that you could and should be worrying about, and you should be generating a whole bunch of other stories in terms of what's going on with your teams and your series in the off season. Then, hey, we've got new charters for our teams. That's not what is important to fans. Im says, well, another endurance event. They'll be wrapping up their season in a couple of weeks at Petit Le Mans. It's hard to believe that it's gone by so quickly, but yeah, it has. So the sports car racing has really grown in terms of my consumption over the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. It's super fun and super enjoyable as well. So that's where we are. We'll see what comes up this week to gather and a week from now and see what we decide is interesting and important and worthy of discussion. At Todd Lewis Sports, at RevTV on X and Instagram if you want to weigh in as well. Have a great week ahead. Do it again next Wednesday.